Rewind, Your Week in Review is sponsored by the Wisconsin Realtors Association, bringing Wisconsin communities to life with great homes, businesses, and neighborhoods. The Wisconsin Realtors Association, the voice of real estate.
This week on Rewind, Your Week in Review. The number of Democratic candidates for U.S. Senate expands to nearly a dozen. AG Kaul moves to push Walker appointee from DNR board. GOP legislators move on redistricting lawsuit, and the latest COVID-19 news. This plus West Powell stock picks. All on Rewind, Your Week in Review for August 20th.
I'm J.R. Ross.
And I'm Scott Bauer.
And welcome to Rewind, Your Week in Review for the week of August 20th. Scott, so starting with the U.S. Senate race, the Democratic field, there are 12 people who have technically either filed with the FEC or announced they're going to run for U.S. Senate. I don't feel like there are 12 people running right now. Would you agree with that assessment, and why?
Have you filed yet, JR?
No, I have not. I will refrain from filing for anything, I guarantee that.
Yeah, obviously there are people in the field who are more active and more positioned and better to make a real run. Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, State Treasurer Sarah Godlewski, Alex Lasry, whose dad's a co-owner of the Bucks, Tom Nelson, the Outagamie County executive. And then there's a number of people that may be in the middle somewhere. Stephen Olakara announced this week, Shantia Lewis, the Milwaukee Alder. And then there are some people whose names are new to practically all of us who, as you say, they face a, June 1st deadline?
Yes, to file papers.
Right, so they've got 10 months. And the primary, in case anyone forgot, is a year away, or a year minus 2 weeks, I think. So we've got a road ahead of us.
Well, I mean, let's kind of underscore some of the uniqueness of this field. I mean, there's a gentleman, Mr. D'Amico, that on his filing with the FEC, it has D?Amico for his name twice, not once but twice. His website has the D apostrophe. On his website, he's asking for write-in votes, which suggests to me he's not actually running, maybe, but wants to be on the ballot. But anyway, I want to focus more on Stephen Olakara because he seems to be now in this second tier of candidates. I mean, I think, depending on who I talk to, Barnes is if not the front runner. Godlewski is in that top tier for sure. Lasry, pretty sure. Nelson is kind of in this maybe top tier, maybe second. Nonetheless, Olakara seems firmly in that next tier of candidates. What is his path to break through in the top tier? Does he have one?
Right. So Stephen Olakara, 31-year-old guy running his first race for office, starting with obviously a high-profile race, comes out of the gate with an endorsement from Barbara Lawton, former lieutenant governor, who's popular among a segment of liberal progressives in Wisconsin, and also has Amanda Stuck, former state representative candidate for Congress, endorsing him. He appears poised to run a real campaign. How he can break through in this kind of a field and not being a millionaire, as we'll talk about coming up, remains to be seen, right? And so whether his ultimate goal is truly to win the Senate primary or just to raise his profile for something later, a different run could be, but he's got an uphill battle.
Well, a couple things I heard this week is that, one, being a moderate, he calls himself a radical bridge builder, I believe, is kind of his phrase, which sounds like trying to be a moderate in the pack. So being a moderate isn't necessarily bad in a crowded Democratic primary. I mean, Tony Evers wasn't the most liberal person in the field for governor in 2018. That said, the Millennial Action Project has ties to Republicans who objected to the results of the Arizona presidential race and counting those electoral votes. So that's kind of like not a good place to be, an association to have in a Democratic primary. So what I'm wondering is how that will play. And then two, how does he raise the money? I mean, we have a really crowded field. I get the sense that maybe some grassroots donors are kind of holding back to see who really emerges. So if you're not in that top tier, don't have the money to do it yourself, how do you raise the money to elevate your profile?
Right. And the biggest difference with that Tony Evers comparison, obviously, was that Evers had won statewide 3 times prior to that. So it was very much a known commodity, probably the most known commodity in that entire field, whereas Olakara is not known at all. And it's a good point about the fundraising. We saw that during the Democratic primary for governor. A lot of people holding back, waiting to see who was going to win or who actually did win, and then the money started to come in. So Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see kind of what lane. I mean, it's clear what lane he's trying to run, which maybe is a great lane if you're running in the general election, the moderate. But it's going to be a little tricky in this field, I think.
And you got to wonder if Democratic primary voters want somebody who will find the political homeless, as Lalakar says, or will take the fight to Ron Johnson. Like that's kind of where we're at in maybe a tough environment for Democrats. You're talking about base on base election, you have to excite the base of what you're doing, and I don't know really how that helps them so far.
And that's assuming Ron Johnson's the candidate.
Yeah. Still no updates on him. Still waiting to see what he's going to do. But speaking of millionaires, we have at least 3 running in the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate. I spent part of my days, Mondays and Tuesdays, going through the financial disclosures for Sarah Godlewski and Alex Lasry. Now, these reports are due, generally speaking, after you get in the race, but they both got extensions that pushed it back until mid-August. Godlewski, and these are wide ranges. Admittedly, like these reports are much more detailed than state reports that we get, but they're still limited in what they can tell you. Godlewski and her husband have assets between $24.7 million and $60.6 million. Lasry, at least $61.4 million and more than $80 million. Now, that doesn't include these partnerships that he has. Those partnerships have investments between $82.2 million and $92.1 million. Again, wide ranges, but he has a lot more money than I have in my bank account. Then Dr. Bettino, she's between $3.7 and $10.9 million, which seems small compared to these guys, but is also a decent chunk of change. Now, a couple caveats with this, Scott. One, Lasry has a trust fund that has a at least $50 million share of ownership in the Milwaukee Bucks. Under Senate rules, the maximum you have to disclose for an amount is $50 million. That could be worth anywhere north of $50 million. The purchase price of the team was $550 million in 2014. It's now worth $1.6 billion. His father took his shares of the team, split it equally among the 5 kids in trust. So a lot of money there. However, he can't tap it for his run because NBA rules have very strict restrictions on ownership shares. That said, we knew these guys could self-finance. Are you surprised they can self-finance to this amount if they wanted to?
Well, I didn't know that Dr. Bettino had that much money, but she's also running her first race, and so we don't know much about her really at all. It's really no surprise that Alex Lasry's got the amount of money he has, and obviously his dad has even more money if he wanted to help, in any way he wanted to within all the rules that exist for that. And Sarah Godlewski is a little bit, we knew she had a lot of money, but this puts a little bit of a parameter on it. Look, they all have plenty of money to do what they want to do in this race, right? And I think maybe the question is more like, how does a Mandela Barnes deal with this? Is he able to fundraise to the point where he can be on TV when it matters in the primary as we get, a year from now, a little less than a year from now, to get his message out above the din that'll likely be there for these folks who can spend a lot of money? Yeah,
we should note that Barnes, because it has until late October to file his. Peter Pekarsky, I believe, is late October, early November. We haven't seen those yet. Tom Nelson has filed. He's not in this same neighborhood as these guys. Now there's Karski. So one thing I'm wondering, though, is how do Democratic primary voters feel about rich candidates? I mean, the first example comes to mind is Herb Kaul, right? Mm-hmm. Herb Kaul, nobody's senator but yours. It worked for years in Wisconsin. The difference between them and Herb Kaul, though, is Herb had been state party chair. His name was on a grocery store chain and a retail chain that every Wisconsinite I know of either had shopped in or driven by multiple times or lifetimes. So I don't know if it's a perfect comparison, but they haven't hesitated to embrace wealthy candidates before. Do you think there's any hesitancy now about a wealthy candidate in a primary like this? I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I think the real question in Democrats' minds is who can win, And I think if they feel like one of these folks can win, especially if Ron Johnson's running, I don't think they'll think twice about voting for them. I mean, some obviously will not like the millionaire aspect of it. But I think at the end of the day, really the question in Democratic voters' minds is going to be who do we think can beat Ron Johnson or whoever the Republican is. Yeah, I mean, and Tom Nelson is trying to run the anti-millionaire campaign, right? He's the populist. He's shooting videos from his garage, talking about how little he has. He's currently on the full Nelson tour. That's right. He's going to every county, pulling another Russ Feingold, trick out of the bag. So, yeah, he's clearly running as a counterpoint to these guys, and pretty effectively. If for the people who take the time to watch his videos, and he's kind of got that folksy populist, voice down. We'll see. Yeah, The one advantage, though, is you can grease the skids, or prime the pump, I should say, of your fundraising with this money, right? Because we're in the dog days of summer. It's not a great time to be raising money, so maybe this helps you put a decent number up the next quarter. Galuski didn't have a great quarter last time. Now, the Emily's List endorsement came late in that quarter. We're waiting to see if that makes a big difference. This next one, Lazary's put in $50,000 so far. Most of his money has been raised from out of state. And that's the other thing I'm wondering, if there's to be a out-of-state millionaire running versus one who was from Wisconsin, moved out of state for a lot of her adult life, then came back. Does that matter to voters if where you were when you became a millionaire?
That's a good question, JR. Tune in a year from now.
All right, so moving on. Josh Kaul has heeded the request from environmental groups to try and file a motion to force Dr. Frederick Prane off the DNR board. Now, the backstory for those at home is that Dr. Prane was confirmed for a 6-year term on the DNR board. It ended May 1st. He, though, has refused to step down, citing a precedent and a legislative council memo from May to Senate Leader Devin LeMahieu saying that he has the ability to do this. Josh Kaul are in this lawsuit that there are state statutes that talk about a holdover period for appointees that they can remain on a board until a replacement is confirmed. He's arguing, though, that state law specific to the DNR board is silent on that. Now, I've said many times I'm not an attorney, never try to play one on TV, but we're going to be Dane County Court to find out, is Dr. Prane going to be in the DNR board much longer, or are they going to try and force him off? What did you take away from this lawsuit, and what kind of strikes you about it?
It is one of the more interesting fights out there right now, I think. Kind of a new territory as far as I know in terms of the legal, getting a ruling on exactly how this is supposed to work. And it'll really be interesting, I think, if Prane prevails and if he gets a ruling, as unlikely as that may be in Dane County, that he can stay on the board. What does that mean for all the other appointees out there who traditionally, when their term is up, whether their successor has been confirmed or not, they step down. A lot of them run away. I mean, they're more than happy to be done with their terms. So I'm intrigued on that end, and the other part that makes this interesting is it feels like an insider fight in a lot of ways. I mean, this guy that most people haven't heard of and everything, but you have the whole element of the environmentalists, conservationists who want him off the board. He was a Walker appointee, and the DNR board's taking up a lot of high-profile issues, the wolf hunt most recently being among those. And so I think it's interesting from that angle where you do have a little bit broader recognition of who this guy is and why it's important, as opposed to maybe, say, somebody on the barber licensing board or something like that.
I mean, 20 years ago when Jim Doyle won office, there were a whole host of appointees that Governors McCallum and Thompson made to boards that never got a hearing or a confirmation in the Senate, and Doyle rescinded those right away. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's quite parallel, though, because Dr. Prane got a full 6 years on the board. He was had a confirmation hearing, was confirmed, got his full 6 years. A little bit different. The precedent has been, though, he can continue serving. What I'm curious is, what's the end game? So I think from the list I got from the governor's office, there are 150 roughly appointees haven't been confirmed yet. Okay, so Republicans feel fairly confident about 2022 because things in D.C. aren't very great right now for Democrats. We know traditionally the party in front of the White House struggles in midterm. They feel good about November of 2022. What if Governor Evers wins re-election? Then what? Do we have this go on indefinitely? And also, don't forget that Prane remaining means a 4-3 board in favor of Walker appointees. So your point about the environmental stuff, we're talking the wolf hunt, PFAS regulations, CAFOs, on down the line, all these contentious issues with the DNR board. It's Walker appointees running the show and a Walker appointee dictating the agenda. Also fascinating, I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but last Friday afternoon, there's a 5-2 vote in that wolf quota, right?
Right.
One of Evers' appointees issued a statement saying, I thought that was a motion, not the final deal. I was wrong.
Yeah.
I've never seen a DNR board member issue something like that. Have you?
No, I've never seen that before. And, occasionally in the legislature you see them coming in later and putting their vote in when they weren't present, but it doesn't count on the official record, and neither does her, I don't think, her rescinding of her vote. It's just issuing a statement explaining her vote. That was a new one on me. But
it's important that it illustrates if she had voted the way she meant to, assuming that she's, statement's correct, it would have been a 4-3 vote in that wolf hunt quota, which is twice what the agency asked for in terms of animals.
Right.
So if you have Dr. Prane, you have Sandra Nass, this Ashland teacher in place, maybe it's a different vote. That illustrates the challenge here. Now looking at what Josh Kaul said about this whole issue, filing the the lawsuit. He said Dr. Prain's term is over. His attempt to remain in the National Resources Board is definitely in defiance of the will of voters is fundamentally undemocratic. Prain fired back, and I talked to him this week. The fact that DOJ will not wait for the normal confirmation process to play out just shows how political this process is for Attorney General Josh Kaul. Also, a side note, the appointment of Sandra Nass, another Evers appointee for the DNR board, remain in Senate org. There's been no movement of those things, so as long as they stay there, they're not moving. Ergo, there's not going to be an effort to confirm a replacement for Dr. Prain. He could be there for a while. All right, redistricting, Scott, our favorite topic in the Capitol, because we care passionately about it because we have to follow it closely. I'm not sure the average person at home really knows what's going on, but we have a new lawsuit. Can you explain to me what is going on with this federal lawsuit?
Yeah, so just to kind of break down the timeline, last week, Wisconsin, all the other states got the census data that they will then use to draw the new lines to redistrict. Less than 24 hours later, the Democrats' lead attorney nationally, Mark Elias, files a lawsuit saying that essentially asking a federal court to prepare to draw the maps on the likelihood that Evers and the Republican legislature will not agree on new maps. Didn't ask the judge to outright do it, just said create a timeline, declare the maps that are in existence now unconstitutional, don't let anyone use those as the basis for new maps, and be ready to draw them yourselves. That immediately started a process of Republican lawmakers attempting to intervene in the lawsuit because they weren't named as defendants, and they have now asked the federal court to allow them to intervene, and then once they are allowed to intervene, to then dismiss the lawsuit, arguing that it's wildly premature. We need to be allowed to go through our process of drawing the maps, and you know, that's basically where we are right now. So we're waiting on the federal court has seated a panel of 3 judges, as you know, 2 Obama appointees and 1 who was appointed by George W. Bush and then put on the appeals court by Donald Trump. So interesting mix there. This is the first of probably many lawsuits we're going to see. There may be even another one filed before this taping is over. Who knows? So, yeah, I mean, a lot to break down there. But I think for the average viewer, this is just the beginning of a months-long, if not longer, fight over these maps. And where it goes from here, we're going to be watching a lot of different places.
So, backstory I remind people about. Typically, in a year like this, you get census data in the spring for multiple reasons, pandemic, et cetera. We got it just last week. That has delayed things. So you talk about the timeline. Municipalities and counties are drawing districts as we speak. They face a crunch because they have to have stuff in place for spring elections. Their filing period opens up in November and closes in January. They got the real issue. So in this filing, the legislature asking to dismiss the suit, they note that we got plenty of time. We don't have to worry until April for circulating papers for state districts and June 1st, the filing deadline. That's not true for the locals. I don't know how they're going to be impacted by all this. Also, it was interesting that the Republican proposed motion notes it should be the legislature first and then the state courts, not the federal courts. Why do they want to go state court, not federal court, Scott?
Well, federal courts have already said that we can't, in the prior round of redistricting, that gerrymandering is not an issue for the federal courts. That's a political issue. So the state court battle is going to be on different issues than the federal court battle is. And if you're a Republican, you want the state court battle, you would think, because the state Supreme Court is controlled by conservatives. So there will be a state lawsuit, most likely, which we haven't seen yet. There may be another federal lawsuit or 2 or 3. So and they'll all be consolidated at some point, and we'll have separate tracks, and we'll see who prevails.
And the federal courts too. I mean, even though it's a different panel than last time, I get the impression that some Republicans feel like the federal court is biased toward a political map, right? So they would not be in favor of a map like the one Republicans drew 10 years ago. They want to see something more fair. And I use fair air quotes because who defines fair in this battle, right? So that's kind of what I'm wondering, if they're more also afraid of not afraid, but not very excited about a federal lawsuit over drawing the lines. And post note, even the state Supreme Court draws the map, the federal court will probably review it. But it just changes the dynamic, right? Because if you draw the map, it's different than if you review the map. So something to keep in mind. And one other post note, There's a lawsuit filed over the attorneys that Republicans retained in anticipation of a redistricting lawsuit. That lawsuit is now moot because there's a lawsuit been filed, right? At the same time, I was told by GOP leaders they're not going to vote to dismiss or move to dismiss that lawsuit. And I couldn't quite figure out why, because what's it matter anymore? But there's a filing from Republican attorneys that they also want new guidance from the state Supreme Court on motions to stay. That's basically when you have an adverse decision, you ask for a stay of that decision while you appeal it somewhere else. There's been a number of occasions with Dane County courts in particular where they've said, no, we're not going to stay this decision. It's in place. You're not going to win. This contract was one of them. They're keeping the lawsuit alive to fight that issue, I think, with the Supreme Court. So
I only have one question. Is this going to be on the test?
No.
Okay.
No, it will not. All right, Scott. We thought we were, a couple months ago, that we were getting past COVID. COVID's not done with us, apparently. So updates this week. We've got lawmaker Andre Jacques, who was hospitalized, being treated. Former lacrosse bishop, who was a vaccine critic, hospitalized, also on oxygen. We have now Dane County has brought back a mask mandate, the first. We'll see if it's the last. Will, before the ink was dry on that lawsuit, basically went to the Supreme Court and said overturn it. But I'm kind of fascinated to talk with you the numbers. What is going on out there? And it's interesting, the spike in cases among those who are vaccinated. Is there an explanation of why that's going on?
Yeah, so state DHS created a new website to kind of graphically show the difference between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated in terms of positive tests, hospitalizations, and death. And really the main takeaway from that is two things. If you're vaccinated, your chances of getting COVID, being hospitalized and dying from it are exponentially less than if you were unvaccinated. I think it was three times more likely to catch it if you're unvaccinated, almost 4 times more likely to be hospitalized, and 10 times more likely to die. In fact, the rate of death per 100,000 people for vaccinated people was 0.1 person out of 100,000, so nearly zero. So that was the one message. The other takeaway from the data showed that there was a doubling of people who were vaccinated who tested positive in February versus July. And the state health department reasoning for that was the Delta variant is more contagious. You know, there are breakthrough cases, but the people who are vaccinated who get it are far less likely to be hospitalized, and almost no one is dying. Whereas the unvaccinated are more likely to be hospitalized, more likely to die. So the new website presents the data in a variety of different ways, graphically with people, and you can kind of see, you know, it's a snapshot that's easy to understand that shows you, yes, if you're vaccinated, you have a much better chance of surviving.
It seems like DH is trying to drive a message about getting a vaccine, don't you think?
Yes.
And also I want to know, do we have like a rough idea of what the numbers are of unvaccinated people? So, I mean, it's not like the vaccinated people cases is driving the spike that we're seeing in Wisconsin, is it?
No. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but for June to July, I mean, the number of cases among the unvaccinated went up way faster than it did for those who were vaccinated. The numbers overall had been so low. There's a huge spike driven by the unvaccinated. And I think yesterday we were at 50% total adult population vaccinated, total population vaccinated, and adult population's around 60%, 18 and over vaccinated. So some room to grow there.
Okay. Well, let's watch a video from the DHS officials talking about what's going on with COVID-19 in Wisconsin right now.
There has been a lot of news circulating recently about vaccine breakthrough cases, and it is important to remember the overwhelming majority of Wisconsin's COVID-19 burden comes from those who are not fully vaccinated. The data show clearly that COVID-19 vaccines are doing their job by preventing severe illness, hospitalization, and death. Getting vaccinated, wearing masks, and following the science will make it possible to protect ourselves and our communities as we move through this current surge.
Part of the problem that we're in right now is twofold. One is that the virus is much more contagious. And the second thing is that, at least when it comes to physical distancing and mask wearing, by and large across the country, we're doing those things less well than we were at the first half of this year. So I think those are, in some ways, a perfect storm for why certain areas of this country, and increasingly in Wisconsin, we're seeing a large wave.
All right, Scott. So stock report is back this week. For Rising, we have Derek Van Orden. I mean, the big thing for him last week was Ron Kind's not going to run again, right? I mean, that changed the dynamic for him dramatically. That's been interesting with what's going on in Afghanistan right now. This guy, Navy SEAL, served 2 tours, I believe, over there. It's put him back in the conservative media spotlight, which helps for fundraising, which is a big deal. You're talking about a guy now who raised $750,000 in the last quarter, getting a chance to be in the public eye, chance to win this seat, probably boost his profile. What I don't know, and ask people this week, is will anybody care about Afghanistan 14 months from now? It's sad to say, but where are voters' attention spans these days? Well, this is something that resonates with them a year from now. I also have to go back to redistricting because we got numbers last week that shows the third has got changed by about 4,000 people, which is not dramatic, right? It's 3,000, 4,000. The thing is, the second has to shed 52,000 people. Where do they go? If you look at the map, if you're a geek like I am, you've moved counties around and trying to figure out, it'd be easy to take part of Mark Bocan's Madison-based district, move it west to the third. Well, everything has a reaction, right? You move those counties over, this comes down. So what I'm getting at is, while there are some Republicans who think Derek Van Orden's wrap this thing up, he's the next congressman from the 3rd District, I want to see the map first to know what's going on. Oh, by the way, Van Orden really hasn't kind of been the spotlight in a negative way yet. There were a couple of stories about him last fall that were not very flattering, but I get the impression Democrats want to really take the shine off this guy, somehow find a way, highlight something he said or done to make him less appealing. We'll see what goes on from there. Also, the Democratic field, I know Brad Pfaff is kicking the tires pretty hard. There's a woman, Rebecca Cook, up in Eau Claire as a businesswoman. She's thinking about it. And then Jeff Smith, state senator, told me this week he's going to look at it. But the caveat for him is he'd have to leave his seat in the legislature to run. There are a number of people I think will like that, like Jody Emerson, who will think about it. But when push comes to shove, do you want to pull the trigger on a run like that? We'll see. Mixed, we have mask mandates. And we talked about COVID a little while ago, but I want to get back into the politics of mask. It seems like a year ago, during this whole thing with COVID, I got the sense Republicans were hesitant to take on Tony Evers about mask mandates, right? Did you get the same sense that there was not a political will to come in and vote to overturn his orders, those kinds of things?
Right. They let it stand and they fought it in court.
Yeah, eventually. So my sense is that they feel like the ground shifted. People are fatigued. They don't want to do this anymore. They're done with COVID. No, COVID's not done with us. So now what? Madison has a mask mandate back in place. Kenosha had a packed hearing this week to talk about a mask mandate. I don't know how that's going to go down there. It would go through March of 2022. School districts, my kids are going back to school in Madison. In a few weeks, I got to wear masks. But it's different in every district, it seems like, what they're going to do. And I just get the sense that the politics of masks has changed in the last year, and there's a fatigue there. I'll be fascinated to see how people comply with the Dane County order, especially outside of Madison, and what goes on from here. Final thing, falling police budgets. A great piece from the Wisconsin Policy Forum this week found that at least 250 municipalities decreased total police spending in 2019 compared to the year before. And it's not just Milwaukee and Green Bay and these big municipalities. 144 of less than 2,000 residents reduced the dollar amount they spent on police over that span. It looks pre-George Floyd, and their conclusion is this is less about a deliberate attempt to defund the police and more about confronting challenging realities, which are, back when Act 10 was done a decade ago, they exempted police and fire from those changes. It's hard to exact savings from police and fire because of collective bargaining powers, and it's becoming a bigger chunk of municipal budgets. So this is an interesting report to keep in mind, this debate about defunding the police. Although these numbers are interesting, politically, I'm going to bet you'll be ads next fall about defunding the police and Governor Evers vetoing the bill that would have penalized municipalities for reducing police budgets. So that is Rewind for the week of August 20th. I am J.R. Ross.
And I'm Scott Bauer.
Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.
Rewind, your week in review, is sponsored by the Wisconsin Realtors Association, bringing Wisconsin communities to life with great homes, businesses, and neighborhoods. The Wisconsin Realtors Association, the voice of real estate.